Who's here? Look at this. Is that Mr. Joseph Atwill?
It is, buddy. How's it going?
Good. I'm Jeff. You can just call me
You're
Jeff.
Jeff. Good to meet you, Jeff.
I'm concerned I pronounce your name wrong. So is it Atwill or Atwell?
At will, like a fire at will.
Okay. Well, that's why I didn't want to say it because it sounded like you fire at will. So
It's what
uh,
it is. It is what it is, buddy. It's fire at will. Yeah. There's a lot of at wills. It's pretty common English name, but at will is like much more rare. I'm not sure that it's just not a misspelling, particularly given my family background of the original name. But my last name is at will.
okay. Well, I honestly uh, I didn't know about you until after I wrote a book called Jesus Demigod, and it's just
I know you did. Yeah, congratulations on that book. That sounds really interesting.
and so I would send you a free copy if you wanted one. And I'd be interested to talk to you about it after you read it. Uh,
Sure.
so you can email me a mailing address or something, and I'll send you
Will
one.
do. Yeah, I'll send it to you today.
All right. And so the other guy that's here, Vanilla Gorilla, he's been my study partner, and we were going through all this stuff together. And I wrote this book based on our studies, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is just crazy. And Uh, when I finished the book, I was on TikTok talking about it, and some other guy come on and says, "Have you seen Caesar's Messiah? Or read the book?" I was like, "No, I didn't know about it." And so I went and just watched the YouTube video, the full movie Caesar's Messiah on YouTube, and I was like, "Holy cow, this is right! I mean, this is exactly what my research is showing. That essentially that the Romans are the ones that created Christianity." You go into much more detail about comparing the differences or the parallels between Josephus and the gospel stories. Uh, but I was like, this is perfect. It makes perfect sense, and I can't understand why everybody don't know this. Uh, so after I read your book, so I got your book, Caesar's Messiah, read it, and I've only read through it once. I did go back and uh, you know, I kind of wrote a review of it on my website and put some of the comparisons that you put in the book there for people to see some of those comparisons. Um, and I recently bought Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, and I
Mhm.
haven't read it yet, but I got to get through it one of these days.
Yeah,
Um,
that book is even worse, more poorly written than Caesar's Messiah. It's very difficult to get through. Um, yeah, Shakespeare is basically it's a response to the Flavian humor in the Gospels. So you're already starting from it's a platform from a complicated place, and so then you've got to decode the plays, and so I mean, what can I say? These people who write this stuff and who control our literature and our history and whatnot, um, they keep themselves hidden, but they like to create legacy. That's the thing about like Caesar's Messiah. People always say, well, why would the Romans do this? They defeated the Jews in battle, but that just sort of misses this part of our human nature, which is vanity and wanting legacy. Because that's the strangest thing about the Gospels is that that's really not a religious document at all. It's just a way to create legacy for you know uh, oligarchs. So
yeah.
that's what they're just writing it in a language that the common person can understand. And like I say, if you've ever been to Rome, you just drive around, you'll see that almost every single structure, the old structures, the archaeology, they're all dedicated to the human gods. This is like the imperial cult. So this is the gospel, just another edifice of the imperial cult.
Were you ever a Christian?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was born a Catholic. I my family moved to Japan I was very young, and I went to St. Mary's Military Academy, which is a Christian Brothers school that had a really intense catechisms, curriculum, and it was the only like English speaking school in Japan in Tokyo, and so it kind of catered mainly to I'd say ambassador children, So it had a really strict sort of educational thing, but it was really very intensely focused on the Gospels. So I was an altar boy. I said the mass in Latin. I had that kind of a Catholic background. Um, and so when I fell away, I didn't really, have any bad experiences. I just kind of more interested in 1964, when I was like 14, 15. I was just interested in the beach. We lived in Los Angeles, and the beach was where it was happening, and I just kind of wasn't interested in the church any longer. But I always kept that kind of interest in Jesus. And then when the historical Jesus criticism started to become, like a literary genre, I started like reading these things. And then I read Josephus, so I could kind of figure out, have a better, more informed position on it. And that's when I started seeing, what I ended up putting in Caesar's Messiah. So, that's the long and the short of it for
So
me.
so you just went from like the age of 14 to like 2010 or something, right?
I started doing the research around 1995, and by 96, I kind of had the theory worked out, and um, it kind of just paralleled my business activities. I had a lot. I was like, 70s and 80s. I was trying to make money, and had a family. Wanted to have a family, and I was very poor at the beginning, so I had a long journey to have some wealth. And once I got to the point where I could sell my businesses, and have some time, that was one of the first things. There was a lot of kind of like reading I wanted to do, and one of them was just this new genre of the historical Jesus. So in and I wrote like a pamphlet that I put in. I advertised in I think it's Biblical Archaeologic Review, just a magazine, that I had seen, and for $40 I could put an ad in there. And I wrote a pamphlet, maybe a 40 page pamphlet that was basically the outline of Caesar's Messiah. And I sold, a few copies, maybe a couple hundred. And then one of the students of Robert Eisenman, he's a professor, New Testament scholarship guy, and he had written James, the brother of Jesus. And one of his students read my pamphlet and gave it to Eisenman, and Eisenman contacted me, and he's the one who really um, kind of got me to write the book and then helped me get it published.
So when you say there was this genre of on like the historicity of Jesus, what are you,
Yeah.
what was that?
Oh, like Holy Blood, Holy Grail. What was the name? Bajent and forget the guy's name. But there were what was really focused on was the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the scrolls, they were saying that there was a whole bunch of them they weren't releasing, and these had like kind of historical ideas about Jesus, And so it was really centered on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the scrolls that hadn't been released, and even some translations of the ones that had been released. And people were wondering about the relationship between the scrolls and Christianity because let's face it, they have a lot of similarities. They use the same proof texts from the Old Testament as their kind of messianic foundation. But anyway, what really got me thinking about it was simply that um, the scrolls are completely militaristic. They have like the war scroll where they chop off Caesar's head, and then they have these apocalyptic battles. And the literature seemed very logical to the idea of Judaism, which is xenophobic and racial and militaristic. Like David cuts off the head of Goliath, and that seemed more logical to me as a religion in a country that had been occupied by Rome. I mean, this period Rome was occupying Judea. They were trying to put this, statues of Caesar into the Jews' temple, so there was this religious problem, and Christianity just didn't make any sense to me. And then I also couldn't figure out why, if they both existed. I mean, you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there's arguments over like when they were written and stuff, but they're in the kind of the same era. Well, how could they have existed in the same place? Judea is so small, right? How could they have existed in the same place and been so opposite of one another? And they don't mention each other. You see, the scrolls don't really talk about the messianic movement of Roman kind of, like Roman perspective Christians, Roman Christianity, and the Gospels don't mention the messianic movement that's militaristic and wants to destroy Rome. So that just seemed really weird to me. And that was when I read Josephus. I wanted to read Josephus because, I mean, what else can you read if you're trying to figure out the first century, right, of Judea? There's no other history. So I read it, and I was just reading it, and I could see these parallels. It's just kind of how I read. When I read stuff, I kind of look at literature as to like, well, how is it assembled? It's just my way of reading. And I could see that what I thought is that Josephus was making fun of Christianity. I thought, well, this guy knows about the Gospels, and he thinks it's ridiculous, and he's putting in some lampoons about them. But then one day, I had really the only like important insight I had, which was that all of the stuff I've been looking at, like the fishing for men, and the three crucified, one survives, and this human Passover lamb story, that Josephus has, they occur in the same sequence as the stuff occurs in the Gospels. And at that point, it was like the floodgates open up because I go, wait a second, they're all happening in the same sequence. So we're not dealing here with just an occasional, lampoon or something. This is a genre of some kind. I didn't understand it, but that was like the beginning of like the serious studies.
Well, I've been a diligent Bible student practically all my life, and I'm still no different now that I realize that it's completely worthless and means nothing. Uh, but but I had not studied Josephus until, I don't know, let's say probably 10 years ago or something. And when I started studying Josephus, I saw a lot of those parallels too. But I got the impression that the Gospels were written after Josephus, that Josephus was written first, and then the Gospels were creating a fictional story based off of what Josephus says. But some of the things, uh, like when Josephus says he saw angels in the clouds when the
Yeah.
temple was destroyed, or chariots in the clouds. I can't, I still think currently that it's plausible that Josephus wrote this first and he came up with this purely mythical idea that they saw supernatural events that would represent God has left the Jewish people and now he's siding with the Romans. And then the gospel writers would have said, well, let's just say Jesus predicted this thing and this is the second coming of Jesus. Oh, so
Well, yeah, I kind of don't disagree with you because as I see it, the events happen first, right? So the war happens first, and the Flavians, because they're imperial cult guys, right? I mean, they're huge. They want to represent themselves as gods, and what they do is divine. So they would see their military campaign as being full of this stuff that prophecies and godlike stuff. And then when they go to write the Gospels, they've got all of that information just as you describe, and here comes the Gospels. The key thing is that they're trying to create like an identification. And I always say, like, in my opinion, if you want to like kind of understand the Gospels, they left a really simple way to do it, which is the Moses Jesus typology. And I have that in the book. I actually have that at the beginning of Caesar's Messiah. You have the story in Matthew where like Joseph goes to Egypt at 2:13, 2:16, Herod massacres the boys, 2:20, they are dead who thought the child's life. 2:21, you go from Egypt to Israel. 3:13, you got the baptism story. Then Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days. And then Matthew 4:4, he gets tempted by bread. 4:7, you have the statement, don't tempt God. And then 4:10, worship only God. So that whole story, which is the entire basically pre-ministry of Jesus, is all lifted from the Old Testament, every single bit of it. Genesis 45:50, Joseph goes to Egypt. He's a dreamer of dreams, just like the guy in the New Testament. Um, the Pharaoh massacres the boys, Exodus 1, Exodus 4, all the men are dead who sought the child's life. I mean, that they take that quote directly from Exodus and they put it in the Gospels. Then you have the Egypt, to Israel. You got the baptism, and then notice like in Matthew 3:13, because like that parallel is very complicated, very oblique. The Israelites are going through the Red Sea, but in Jesus, he's not in the same location. River Jordan, but they make sure that you see the typologic connection because in Matthew 3:13 they have the statement, they are dead who sought, out of Egypt I've called my son. And that's lifted right from Exodus 14. So they make sure the linkage is there. Wilderness, Moses is there for 40 years, it's typology, it's not verbatimism, 40 years, 40 days,
Right.
And then in the wilderness, they take the three statements, tempted by bread, do not tempt God, worship only God. They just lift right, that's just verbatim taken from Exodus and put into Matthew. But the whole point is, I'm sorry to be long-winded, the whole point is that typology is so you recognize that Jesus is a new Moses, right? God has put his hand over Jesus's pre-ministry, and all these little events are occurring, and it's in the same sequence. These parallels are occurring, same sequence, like in the original the original covenant. Then has produced the new covenant. But they have that parallelism so that an alert reader can see that that Jesus is coming right out of Moses's first covenant. He's the new covenant, and so that's how you understand the Gospels. If people can just understand those like 10 things, and they can see the sequence of them and how how they're constructing it, and that it's fiction, I think then they're ready to go on, and you can really make sense out of the Gospels, where in the Gospels, Jesus says the Son of Man is going to come, and you're going to have all these destructions. And he lists the date. He says before the generation passes, generation's 40 years, and he lists the events. Jerusalem's going to be encircled, temple's going to be razed. He's talking about Titus's destruction.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there you
so
have it. The Son of Man is Titus, and that's a perfect alignment of the Gospels with the imperial cult,
right.
So
So
there it is.
it's so obvious, like
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah,
that the New Testament story is just a literary retelling with new names and people. It's not a historical event at all,
yeah,
except that it is tied to the war. So it's tied to that's the historical event, the war. But
yeah,
the
yeah,
story is just a literary retelling with new names. And
yeah.
so
Well, they,
why is
they,
it?
they, yeah, yeah. That's
Why
right.
is it that every single biblical scholar in the world does not admit this obvious truth?
Well, I'll tell you the truth, brother. There are really dark oligarchic forces in this world, and they do not want the information to come out. Everyone uses Christianity for different things, and right now it's very useful for them. So they would rather keep the religion in place.
Well, so let me bring one specific guy up because
Sure.
you've had a bunch of toe to toes with Richard Carrier, right?
Yeah, good old Richard Carey. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Richard helped me come to the conclusion that Jesus didn't exist, but I think your version of events and your theory is far more logical and justified and true.
Sure.
I guess he takes the position that Paul really did believe in a invisible supernatural angel from outer space. He wrote the book Jesus from Outer Space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I know he kind of mocks you, and all you're saying is this is just a literary retelling, which doesn't require any insane people. It has a clear motive that emperors just
Right.
trying to deify themselves. So, what is your thought on? So, why is that Richard Carrier, in your opinion, uh, refuses to accept what you think?
Well, I'd have to conjecture, you know what I mean? Because I've never met him, and we've had like 100 or many exchanges. But I think he's just a puppet. I just think that he he actually said once, he told a colleague of mine, he said, well, basically, someone paid me to do it. That's what he said. So I don't know who controls him or what, but his scholarship is, is pretty ridiculous. It's like the way he criticizes it is like he would take something like I say, that the three crucified one survived passage in Josephus is typologically linked, to the story in the Gospels. So he'll take that and then he'll say, yeah, but look at this. This is different. That's different. But he just completely refuses to get into what my theory is, which is that it isn't that it's verbatimism. It's not the kind of parallel that he's trying to critique. It's just that there's enough parallelism. You see, there's sufficient amount that an alert reader can see the connection. And then you have to think about sequence because that's what really holds the whole thing together. But he has never once in any of his critiques talked about like a sequence. He just doesn't, even though
Right.
it's the centerpiece of my theory. And he doesn't mention the idea that, well, there is enough parallelism that this could be a typologically linked, these two passages could be typologically linked because there's enough parallelism. And so what I tell him is I go, hey, Richard, I could take like my parallels and I could find somebody who has written about the parallel, legitimate New Testament scholars for basically all of them. I mean, obviously, some of the stuff are just the same thing, like the Jerusalem's encircled with a wall, right? This isn't like a parallel; it's the same historical event. They're occurring in two stories, but they're the same. They're talking about the same. Jesus predicting, but Josephus is recording, but it's the same thing they're talking about. Same thing with the destruction of the temple, right? Same thing with the abomination of desolation. When you get to stuff like three crucified, one survives, well, I mean, what's his name? The guy who wrote the Passover plot, Hugh Schoenfield, he has a whole thing on the parallelism, right, between the two passages. But the thing is that you just have to remember that they're occurring in sequence. You see, it isn't that the parallel isn't there. It isn't that other scholars haven't written about them. It's just that nobody is sitting there lining the things up side by side as you go through the literature to
Well,
recognize
and
that they're all linked together.
for me, it's not even necessary to go into that much detail. When I first found out, and I don't know, I think I found out before I read Caesar's Messiah about the three crucified and one
Yeah,
survive. When I saw that, I'm like, holy cow! And then you tack onto that this Joseph of Arimathea, and you say, well, who is the Joseph of Arimathea?
right. Yeah.
Where
Who
is
could he be?
Arimathea?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And nobody knows. So this is a character that comes out of nowhere and all of a
Yeah.
sudden shows up at a critical moment and he's a prominent figure and then he disappears. He doesn't show up again. And
Disappears from history, but he's just there for that one moment in time so he could the author of the gospels can write about him. And if you look at the last names, I mean, Joseph Bar Matthias is how you'd write Josephus's full name, and Joseph Arimathea. I mean, you're only talking about two different Greek letters. That's it.
right.
And see, for typology, it's got to be close enough. I mean, Joseph Bar Matthias, Joseph Arimathea. It's got to be close enough. It's a very unusual close parallelism. And then you have all these other little weird details in the story. So, I mean, there you go. It's got to be close enough for typology. Then the only question is it in the right place in the sequence? And you know something funny? Hugh Schoenfield, he actually, among the things that he listed as similarities, is the fact that um, in both the Gospels and Josephus, this event occurs at the end. You see, he didn't go into the whole. He didn't try to understand the Gospels on all the sequence, through all the way through it. But he recognized that that was something that was part of the parallel, is where it was placed, in the story. So, people, I mean, like Carrier, I've had enough communication with him that I'm pretty sure he's fake. I don't think his scholarship is really authentic. I think he's just was told, like I said, I mean, it's a conjecture, but I think it's a really pretty plausible one. Just too many people make money off Christianity, and they would rather not have it come to an end, particularly this kind of an end. which would damage the finances of a lot of you know
Right.
ministers and
So
whatnot. But it would also screw up the whole thing with Israel, because so much of the Israeli support comes from, so
yeah.
because of that, they would rather have have not have like a denouncing, and of the religion.
Right. So since I was a Christian, I say I was a Christian for 30 years as an adult, from the age of 16 to 46. I say I was a Christian. I identified as a Christian. I'm 48 now, so for the last 2 years, I'm like, this stuff is all garbage. And so I'm so upset about being duped into believing something that I now know is false, that it's like my life goal to expose it for what it is so that people realize that this is not true. So I'm wondering what your motivation is. Like, what would you like to see happen? Would you like there to be this universal recognition that
Yeah, I
Christianity
would.
is fake?
I'll tell you, when I first brought it out, I actually, I'll tell you the truth. I did the analysis, and for me, it was just like a literary puzzle. I wasn't, you know, trying to do anything in terms of like society. I just saw a puzzle, and I was trying to solve the puzzle, and I worked through it, and I wrote out the puzzle how I kind of solved it, and I just took the analysis and put it in a drawer for 2 years. I didn't even look at it because I was worried that I would just cause more. I thought this is just going to cause, what's the point of this? It's going to like just hurt people and stuff. I brought it out finally because I realized that some people would really want to know the truth one way or another, and I figured it was like the guilt over not giving people something that could be valuable to them just overcame my fear of like, doing something that would hurt people, so that was like in 1996. But now I'm really happy I brought it out because I just feel that um, we really need, just for democracy to exist, we got to be more skeptical of like narratives that the oligarchs give us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We got to be more skeptical because now they got the internet and they can have all this technology to make us, think different things and stuff. Democracy, we got to like up our game here for the citizens if we're going to like not end up as mentally controlled robots by these guys. So I think that Caesar's Messiah is good because it helps people be skeptical. You just don't take a story that they give you and they give you a few experts and then go, okay, believe that. You don't do that. You got to be more thoughtful, more skeptical. So that's why I hope Caesar's Messiah. I've had a lot of bad experiences because of it, but I'm happy to take every single one
Well, what
because
kind of bad
I just
experiences? You mean like Richard Carrier,
oh,
publicly?
no, 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 I don't care about that. I know I've been, like, attacked, physically attacked,
Really?
Yeah, I gave I don't do, like, public lectures anymore. I gave a I did, like, a deal in, 2013, 2012 in England, and it just turned into an absolute, like, food fight, I mean, I couldn't even walk the streets. There were people that, there's, like, a lot of really devout Christians that were just furious with me, and my wife was with me, and it was just this horror story. So I didn't like that, but I and I was a guy tried to. I mean, I've had a couple fights, not fights. Guys just tried to come up and cold cock me,
Really?
and so you know I mean, that's just too bad. I mean, I kind of knew it was going to happen when I brought the thing out. I mean, what do you expect? You know what I mean? But it's kind of calmed down now. I haven't had any trouble in years, and I'm just perfectly happy that it's out. And I know it's upset a lot of people, but all I'm trying to do with it is just make people more skeptical of narratives. That's it.
Yeah. So let me bring in another scholar. What has been your interaction with or concerning Bart Ehrman?
Well, Ehrman, I don't think he like Carrier, who has never read the book, as far as I can tell. Ehrman has never read the book, but he started criticizing it publicly, and he made a statement. He goes, um, "Not only could I beat Atwill in a debate, any one of my students could beat Atwill in a debate." He had this public statement, So I wrote back. I got a hold of him. I go, "Hey Bart," I said, "Okay, challenge accepted. Let's have a discussion. I'll come out there to North Carolina and we'll like get it on." He goes, "No, I'm not into that." But he said, "I'm going to pass you over to my agent." And the agent wanted me to post like $20,000 so that Erdman's time would be paid for.
Right.
And I said, "Well, Bart, this isn't exactly what we discussed. Why don't we just do it online?" And then he never got back to me. See, so this is, they make statements like that, but I'm always, I mean, like you know, I try to, I'm always, if someone really wants to debate and they're kind of a serious scholar, I'll always show up. I love
Well,
that
have
stuff. That
have you
stuff's
ever
fun.
debated a scholar? Is there a
Oh,
YouTube video or
sure.
anything out there?
I debated Robert Price,
Really?
who's like Robert M. Price. He's one of the best, New Testament scholars there is.
Well,
And
what was that about? Because he believes Jesus didn't exist.
right, but it was about my theory, and he called it parallel mania, and he wrote a huge debunking of my book, and he'd actually read it. So he didn't like it. He wrote a big debunking of it. He and I had a debate. And the day after the debate, Robert issued a statement that he would never do another public debate.
Well, so who does Robert Price think created Christianity? If he thinks Jesus didn't exist, he knows
Well,
it's
I think
fake. So who did it?
that was like almost 20 years ago. Now Robert's pretty much into my theory. I think now Robert would say most likely Romans. He's a real careful scholar, so he wouldn't do anything 100%. But I think he would say, it's like well, he's actually he did a video saying, what I've learned from Caesar's Messiah. So and then most you know other scholars who haven't read the book dismiss it. They don't characterize the theory, accurately. They create a straw man. They'll say, well, Atwill is claiming that Jesus is Titus. That's one of the ways. I mean, actually, this is completely incorrect. I'm talking about, this is a typological prefiguration. It's not that they're the same individuals at all. But they just characterize it like that because look, here's the thing: New Testament scholarship. It is a very low resource world. Most of these scholars are dead broke. Very few of them have really good jobs with universities. Maybe Bart's one of the few guys. I mean, Carrier, he goes around to like speak at humanist societies and he sleeps on people's couches, you know, in order to make ends meet. I mean, so they're not very wealthy, and they don't like the idea that someone who doesn't have a PhD, doesn't come from the academic world, would get a lot of publicity and get a lot of resources. I mean, Caesar Messiah sold, a couple 100,000 copies. They made a documentary out of it. It was well received. And so they just think of like the money that they're losing, and
Right.
so they just dislike that. Um, it's a very, I mean, here's the New Testament scholar. Remember, it's non-falsifiable. No one can. How are you going to prove one way or another? So you've got all kinds of bizarre theories, hundreds of them. Hundreds of bizarre theories. Um, Everyone with a PhD just basically has some unique theory about it, and it's just a madhouse. Really. So I
Right,
don't.
but
I
I
don't
can't
really.
believe that any of them don't come up with the basic, easily defendable
Yeah.
argument that the Romans created it, because it's all throughout
Right. It's
my primary the thing that I do. I don't even
yeah.
have to appeal to Josephus. All I do is just read the Bible. I mean, First Peter 2 verse
Yeah.
17 says, "Honor the emperor." This is the job of Christians, to honor the emperor. Romans
There it is.
13 says,
Yeah.
obey those whom God has appointed authority over you, and so the Bible itself
There it
tells the
is.
story.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
I mean, and also the Romans had if you look at it just from the perspective of evidence, they had the motivation, they had the opportunity, and they had the capacity to do it, right? I mean, they had all these Jewish intellectuals like Josephus and Philo, the family of Philo. These are their house intellectuals, right? I mean, Titus's mistress was Bernice. She is a Maccabean princess. I mean, these guys are the establishment kind of Jews of the era. So they had the capacity to write the Gospels, and then they sure as heck had the motivation. If you look at
Yeah.
the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can see they have the motivation. So they're the first people you should suspect, the very
Right.
first people.
So,
But then they
so
don't, though.
I read the 11th chapter of my book, Jesus Demigod, and put it on YouTube, so it's free. Uh, you
Well,
go
I'll
just
check it out. I'll check. Can you send me a link? I'd love to see it. Yeah.
yeah. I can send you a link, or you can just search Jesus Demigod 11. Just put the 11 Jesus
I'll
Demigod
do it.
1 1,
I'll do that. Yeah.
and you should be able to pull it up and just listen to it. And in the
Cool.
meantime, I think we're about to get cut off because we only have a 40-minute time limit. We're
Yeah,
almost
I
up.
know that always happens with Zoom. Yeah. Well, look,
So
Jeff, like like I'll check out. Send me the link. I'll read it. I'll send you my address if you want to send me the book, and let's get together in a couple weeks and have another discussion. Okay.
sounds great. Nice talking
All
to
right,
you.
brother. Nice meeting you. Thank you
Nice,
for the introduction. Yeah, we'll
nice to
talk
meet
soon.
you.
Okay.
All right. Thank
All right.
you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.